Mysterious World is written and read by me, Albert Jack. Chapter 1. Who really makes crop circles? Where do they come from? Strange formations in fields of wheat and other crops have been appearing since the 1970s. Are they made by aliens parking their spaceships, or is there an explanation far more down to earth? Of all the subjects I've explored for this series, the one I was most looking forward to finding out more about was crop circles. For years I've been hoping there'd be an extraordinary paranormal explanation for crop circle appearances, or better still, that we were actually being visited by aliens from other worlds. Then, when it became clear that most of the circles were in fact hoaxes, I relished the thought that I would finally have the chance to dismiss all of those crop circle fanatics I've heard on the radio over the years, talking with great passion about the temporary parking of invisible spacecraft in a field, leaving behind an imprint in flattened wheat when they zoomed back into outer space. The only extra bit of evidence offered for this startling conclusion appeared to be that witnesses claim flocks of birds veer around crop circle sites as if avoiding or circumnavigating something the rest of us cannot see. I was looking forward to poking fun at the gaping holes left in the arguments of these so-called experts when expounding their elaborate theories on the 6 o'clock news. The obvious question in the first case would be, how then do you explain the crop circles that have appeared directly under power lines? How could a spaceship have landed there? And why choose that spot when there was plenty of field to land in without being so inconvenienced? At the same time, though, I hoped that all the circles weren't hoaxes and that I could expose the hoaxes who seem to be making a real nuisance of themselves. But having studied the evidence and looked at the extreme lengths to which some of the hoaxes are prepared to go, I'm no longer sure I can. The very first recorded example of a crop circle is a woodcut dated 1678 and entitled The Mowing Devil, or Strange News out of Hertfordshire. It depicts the devil cutting out a pattern in a field of wheat using a scythe. The text explains that the greedy farmer had refused to pay a reasonable fee for the workers for the harvest that year and announced he would rather have the devil do the work instead. The following morning he woke to find old Nick had done just that, and the farmer became too scared to enter the field ever again, and so the harvest and his livelihood were lost. However, crop circles didn't come back to the public attention until 3 centuries later, during the late 1970s. Their relatively sudden appearance caused a sensation as the British press fought each other for the best photographs. Keen to get ahead of the trend, several of the newspapers began employing circle makers of their own to create ever more elaborate patterns throughout the countryside and, in the process, obviously guaranteeing themselves the first and best pictures of this mysterious new phenomenon sweeping the land. But, while the newspapers may have employed circle makers to create some of the circles they photographed, this wasn't known about, and at that time the circles appeared, for the most part, not to be man-made in origin. During the early 1980s, crop circles began to attract serious interest with the discovery of a formation at a place called Cheesefoot Head, a high point on the Chalk Downlands close to Winchester. Here, a circle 52 feet in diameter was flanked by 2 others exactly half the size, symmetrically placed north and south of the larger circle. The perfect spiralling of the flattened straw and the precision placement of the formation proved very difficult to explain at the time, scientifically or otherwise. Other formations soon began to appear in wheat, grass, rapeseed oil and many other crops. Expert researchers started to study the designs and began to believe that individually or collectively they amounted to coded messages or directions to something as yet unknown. These were being transmitted, they said, by intelligent beings, also as yet unknown. Other physical features were pointed out, such as the way a circle was aligned with the sun or the moon, leading to the idea that supernatural forces were at work across the English countryside. It seemed that such mathematically precise formations, especially the increasing complicated circles that were emerging by the late 1980s, were not, and never could be, the work of man himself. Then, in 1991, 2 elderly landscape artists, Dave Chorley and Doug Bauer, fired an arrow directly into the heart of the ever-growing Crop Circle fan club. They went public and admitted they'd been making them by hand since the 1970s after reading about the famous so-called saucer nests, impressions left in the crops that had appeared down in Australia. By the time they retired from the business, Doug and Dave had successfully completed over 250 crop circles across southern England. Doug and Dave's inspiration had been a collection of 7 circles left in the wheat fields near Bordertown, Australia. Predating these and providing the original source of inspiration for all the modern-day crop circles that followed was the Tully saucer nest, which appeared on the 19th of January in 1966 on a piece of land at Horseshoe Lagoon near Tully, north of Queensland. After the fruits of Doug and Dave's labours in Hampshire and Wiltshire began to attract public attention, a veritable epidemic began to spread. Crop circles popped up everywhere. Each was immediately studied by experts who either dismissed it as a hoax or accepted it as genuine, that is, not created by man. Artists then started competing to confound these so-called experts by having one of their circles proved as genuine. That was the highest accolade, albeit hugely ironic that for a circle to be good enough to be considered genuine implied that no artist had been involved in its creation. And this was a form of art after all, even if the medium was rather avant-garde during the 1980s and 1990s. But it is on a par with cutting a cow in half, preserving it in formaldehyde and displaying it in the Tate Modern. Hey, it's all art, isn't it? Not according to the scientists and the followers of the growing crop circle community it wasn't. It was deception, and it continually interrupted their serious research in what appeared to be a brand new type of paranormal activity. As their resentment grew, so the work of the circle makers became increasingly elaborate. As soon as one design was considered too intricate for humans to create, therefore deemed genuine, another one would appear that was even more complicated. And the probably cashing in stories from farmers about the strange lights and howling animals deepened the mystery, as did apparent reports of military helicopters hovering around circle sites in the dead of night. One crop circle appeared in a field close to Stonehenge, the spiritual home of the Druids, shortly before the summer solstice of 1996. Predictably enough, that day, falling on or around the 21st of June, is Stonehenge's busiest day of the year, and in 1996 it was even busier. The nation's great unwashed descended in force to appreciate this new mysterious formation, and then spent ages analysing each bent stem of wheat, taking electromagnetic recordings of earth samples and recording detailed cross-measurements of the circle. The press arrived in their helicopters, and the photographs of this circle appeared on television and in every newspaper. When the crop circle experts began to turn up in their anorak-clad droves, the farmer then erected a shed and charged an entry fee to his field to help compensate for the damage. By the end it was estimated he had collected over £30,000. A good day's work indeed, when set against £150 worth of damaged wheat. "That'll be treble gin and tonics all round, please, landlord, and keep an eye out for the taxman, Bob." Oh yes, crop circling had become big business. Small companies were offering gullible businessmen helicopter flights over crop circle formations. Bus tours were provided, hotels were always full in the vicinity of new designs, and local tradespeople benefit from the arrival of new enthusiasts every week, every month. Then there were the films, the books, the television documentaries, the radio programs, and not to mention the T-shirts and photograph collections that were all for sale. But there is a very good reason why those involved rarely own up to the deception, and that motive is not necessarily the taxman. The main reason is that, despite the open hostility between the crop circle believers, the hardcore, and the actual circle makers, the artists, usually in the direction of the circle makers, the two opposing factions are completely dependent upon each other because, as any artist will tell you, national publicity is hard to come by. And so, without the suggestion of unknown forces at work, very few people will take an interest in this new crop circle art on its own merit. So artists needed the myth makers to continue to be as vocal as possible every time a circle appeared. Equally, without the circle makers there would be no circles for otherwise bored individuals to fly over and photograph, or to take to the fields en masse with their measuring tapes and electronic devices for measuring unusual electrical activity. Static. Who knows? Something. They'll find it. In the debate of whether crop circles are man-made or whether created by supernatural forces of some kind, the balance of evidence tips very much towards the former. The circle makers have proved pretty conclusively that they are able to create these elaborate and complicated designs using relatively simple resources: string, planks of wood, plastic piping and a garden roller, in just a few hours. They have even been filmed doing it, but the believers, whilst accepting that some circles are man-made, still prefer to wonder why their mobile phones fail to work in crop circles, or why flattened wheat is less electrically charged than the wheat standing nearby. Any schoolboy with the basic understanding of physics could step forward and enlighten them by explaining that standing wheat will act like an aerial and attract the atmosphere's electromagnetic charge much better than flattened stems lying on the ground. Presumably that's why all your lightning conductors point upwards from the roof of your house and don't lie flat in the back garden. And what's more, my mobile phone doesn't seem to work anywhere in the countryside, let alone in the middle of a field. All the pseudoscience offered as solid evidence simply doesn't stand up to detailed cross-examination. Nothing has been suggested to prove that crop circles are made by anything other than man himself. There is absolutely no credible evidence of mysterious forces at work, and, as is always the case when it comes to proving such things, we will need to see a real alternative to the man in a cap with a plank of wood working at night theory. Don't expect many people to believe that ancient ruins lying underground are responsible, or mini-tornadoes, or plasma vortexes, or any other freak of nature, because if any of these could have created the circles, then it should be easy enough for scientists to prove, or at least to reconstruct under controlled conditions. But nobody ever has. Already I can hear the believers sharpening their tongues in order to dismiss me as a CIA plant. Or perhaps I'm part of a wide-ranging government cover-up program, denying the existence of extraterrestrial forces and/or denying the coded messages left in wheat fields by visitors from Mars. That is what crop circle believers usually do to vocal opponents of their mystic beliefs, and I'm already looking forward to discussing it. Because there is no tangible evidence of any intergalactical interference in any of our wheat fields, and the only slight piece of evidence ever offered always turns out to be a hoax, later admitted by the hoaxers themselves. Usually they are the very same circle makers proving to the world how easily fooled the so-called experts are and showing us exactly how they created them. In one such case from 1996, famously called the Oliver's Castle video, balls of light referred to by the experts as BOLs were filmed floating across a field while a crop circle mysteriously appeared directly underneath them. The cameraman was heard to be whispering, "Wow, that's amazing." Now, never having been in that position myself, I don't know how I might react if I saw such a thing happen right in front of me, but I imagine it's rather more likely that I'd have been running down the lane screaming in terror, having dropped all of my equipment. Wow, that's amazing indeed. Equally suspicious is the way in which the camera stays fixed on the field where the crop circle appears, whereas most cameramen would tend to follow the balls of light around with their lens and not hold the camera in one fixed position as they flash in and out of view. Further investigation revealed that it was indeed a hoax. John Whaley, a young man from Bath, had created the illusion by filming a wheat field and using an editing program to create balls of light. He then gradually faded out some of the wheat to leave the effect of a crop circle design. Quite a simple process. But the film caused a sensation and enthusiasts all over the world tried to contact Whaley. Funnily enough, none of them did. And then, digging a little bit deeper, it came as no surprise to find out that Whaley wasn't his real name at all. The young man in question actually turned out to be one John Wabe. He was a partner in a video editing company. Needless to say, he sold his video, made a documentary about how he created his film, and apparently then signed a lucrative contract with a television company. Predictably, he made himself thoroughly unpopular with the resentment-prone members of the crop circle and UFO communities across the world, some even threatening to sue him. Others, meanwhile, quietly ignored the hoax and carried on with their important research into intergalactic messages left in fields of wheat. The believers dismissed the evidence of circle makers as the Doug and Dave effect. Television documentaries about the man-made circles are also known as Doug and Dave-style programs, and so on. So blinkered have some become that any suggestion of a circle being made by man is derided. Skeptical believers. Now there's a conundrum. And in the meantime they have even given their science a special name. Seriology, they call it. Now, of course, as usual with all of these types of mystery, it's simply impossible to prove a negative. Some people will believe whatever they want to believe, although most of us need to see some evidence first. So, as with the Bigfoot mystery and any other mystery, show us the carcass. Show me some evidence. One company, called Circle Makers and run by the British artist and documentary filmmaker John Lumberg, makes no attempt to hide its identity or its work. The company even accepts commercial commissions to create crop circles and has done so all over the world. In one case, it created a well-known cereal company logo, and in another, the Sun newspaper asked it to make a huge crop logo of the 5 Olympic rings to support Britain's attempt to host the next Olympic Games. The following day, they ran a front-page headline, "Aliens back our bid," and printed the photograph underneath. Just stop for a moment and wonder how many people in Great Britain, or even across the world, actually believed that headline. Very few, I imagine, but I expect some did. When he was asked why he does it, John stated that, among the numerous reasons for creating crop circles, the chief one is being able to construct something that most people believe to be beyond human capability. Now for me, that's a pretty good reason to do anything, and good luck to him. On their website, circlemakers.org, the group claim the circles they create are actually genuine in the sense that there is no attempt on their part to deceive anybody. They are open about their art and ridicule many of the so-called crop circle experts who claim to have had visits from outer space and other paranormal experiences. Well, you would too if you'd spent a hard night in a wheat field making a giant spiral spelling out the word Weetabix only for somebody to claim it's the work of the little green men from Mars. So, of the many explanations for the sudden appearance of elaborate designs found in some fields of wheat ranging from the paranormal to the extraterrestrial, none of them have ever been supported by any genuine evidence, and therefore none of them can be as convincing as the most likely explanation of all: a man and a cat with some string and a plank of wood, and a flask of tea to keep him going, who is still continually dismissed by the seriologist as a hoaxer. So, now I've kind of changed my mind. I began by believing the circle makers were a bloody nuisance and wanted to find out what, if anything, had created the circles they didn't. But instead, the only solid evidence I can find is that people have created all of them. So now I respect them for their art, for art's sake, and I hope crop circles continue to appear in more and more clever and elaborate forms, and some of them are very clever indeed. The meditation groups down in the southern England who sit there in crop circles contemplating whatever it is they contemplate can happily continue to do so as far as I'm concerned, although I think the artist should charge them a fee for it in future. Perhaps he or she could leave out a saucer for the money to be placed in, although on second thoughts maybe that will create even more confusion for some of these people. But for the many who dismiss the circle makers as publicity seekers and hoaxers, I have another idea. Imagine H.G. Wells's time machine, only from outside the machine rather than from inside it. In other words, we just happen to be walking past the site of the inventor's house as he flashes through our time zone and on his way to the year 30,000 or wherever. Now, you wouldn't see the actual time machine as it would be travelling far too quickly, but its track or footprint would suddenly appear right in front of you, and then gradually fade away over the next few weeks. There you are. That's my alternative explanation for crop circles. Scientists of the distant future have managed to build time machines, and these are racing backwards and forwards through our own time zone, leaving the footprint of their time machines in our fields, where they are actually standing in a couple of thousand years' time. That would explain why birds fly around them too. Now, is that any more ridiculous than any of the other theories you've heard from the real experts? And I just made that up. For fun. But in the meantime, the two opposing groups should, in my humble opinion, try to get on with each other. The artists should be allowed to continue to create their art without having their cars vandalised by the believers. And the believers should be allowed to continue running around in fields, measuring bent wheat straws and taking soil samples without people like me making fun of them. And as to that, I really will try to restrain myself in future, but I can't promise anything. You can call me Doug, or Dave, from now on. This has been Crop Circles and Who Actually Makes Them from Albert Jack's Mysterious World, read to you by me, Albert Jack.